Hello Mayhem Makers, welcome back to another summer sampler tutorial. We are moving on to block 3, which is called Birds in the Air, and I want to start out with actually showing you how to cut the large triangle for this square, because this may be the most awkward part, especially if you are new or a beginner. So I'm starting out with just a fat quarter because we need at least a 12 and 7/8 inch square to start with. So what I start with first is I'm going to cut the selvage off because that just does not belong in your quilt anywhere. I'm pretty much just roughly lining up the straight edge of my ruler with the selvage. The selvage really isn't straight, so I just want to make sure I have a nice clean line. And then what I will do is generally I like to turn my fabric and then line up, because now the bottom is a straight line. I can then line up this ruler, and this is the 8.5 by 24.5. Bare minimum you need the 6.5 by 24.5 just to live in your sewing room. I use this constantly. And then I love these grippers, it makes it easy. So I'm lining up the straight line, and I'm going to clean up that edge. So you see that it's kind of wonky, it's not straight. So we're making 2 straight sides. Then what I will do, because I don't have a ruler big enough, and I don't expect a lot of you to have that, is I can then line all this up on my mat. So this is the only time that I ever tell people that using your mat to measure cutting for your quilt is okay. When you start getting this big, you really have no choice. So what I have is a straight line here on the bottom and another straight line here. So a good, nice, straight, clean 90 degrees. Then what I can do is take my ruler and find the size of square I need. So 12 and 7/8, or you can round up to 13, and then just know that you're going to trim your block down at the end, whatever works for you. And I make sure I match the mark at the bottom of the mat and then up on the other side of the fabric where I can start to see it pop out. And I'm making sure the ruler stays kind of straight on the bottom, match all these lines as much as humanly possible so that I'm getting as straight a square as I can. I'm going to cut that part. Okay, so this is now just extra. If you wonder where all my extras go, they go to the store. Employees love when I bring all my scraps in, because there's always something fun and funky, or I'm doing rainbow quilts and all kinds of goodies and scraps, and even blocks up here. I don't keep a lot of my orphan blocks. So then we're going to repeat the same. So I now have 3 nice clean sides. This is my 12 and 7/8, and so I'm just going to finish up that square by measuring once again at the 12 and 7/8 mark on my mat. So I'm matching my mark here, my mark down here. I'm making sure my ruler is nice and straight at the bottom, and then trim off that excess. So now I have the square that I need. This block is the most, sadly, what I would call kind of wasteful, because you really only need half this triangle. So now what I'm going to do is put it on its point. Come closer to me. And I'm going to line up. So my 2 points with my nice long ruler. I'm going to cut this square in half on the diagonal just once. That's all you need. So if you like this block a lot, you can make more of them, and then you'd have plenty of triangles. But sadly, for the sampler, you just need 1. Okay, now I'm going to pause. We're going to take you over to the sewing machine. I'll show you how to make the rest of this block. All right, so we are back for making the Birds in the Air block. I'm going to show you how to make 2 different methods of a half square triangle. One will make 2 at a time, the other will make 1 at a time, and then we'll start putting this block together with all the half square triangles and just some triangles in general. So a lot of different things we're learning this time around. I'm going to move you down here just a little bit, because this is the important area that you want. So to make 2 half square triangles at a time, I generally, whatever's my lighter fabric, I'm going to draw a diagonal line on the back. Okay. And I'm going to sew just 1/4 inch from either side of this line that I drew. I have my fabrics right sides together. What's nice with Kona, there is no real right or wrong side. So we'll take it to the machine and we'll sew down either side. So this is a great way to make a whole bunch of half square triangles at a time. So the other side, we're just gonna get these done. All right, so you'll see, so 1/4 inch either side of the line. Then take your lovely ruler, cut them in half, and press them. Plain and simple magic, right? And we're going to use our lovely starch spray. We're going to starch this seam and set it first, and then press it open. And we're going to trim this half square triangle. Always double check your half square triangles when you're making them this way, and trim them if you need to. If you leave them a little too big, potentially a little too wonky, your block is just going to keep being wonky. So if you want to make sure that you're keeping everything square, this is one of the biggest problems I see with beginners is they don't know to trim. And so however much it's off just kind of keeps expanding and growing. So here, we'll show you how to trim this guy. We'll come back over here. All right, so we're going to line up the diagonal line on there. We're going to double check our pattern, make sure we know what size these are going to be, and trim 4.5. All right, so the nice thing with this square is it is 4.5, and I've pretty much just centered it, so I have to trim all the way around, make sure it stays on the diagonal, and we're just taking that little bit. But this little bit is what's going to throw everything off as you go, because it just keeps adding and growing and growing and growing. So there is one half square triangle. There's another one, and we need 3. So I decided so that we could teach you a couple different methods. That third one we're going to make in not quite a common way. I don't like necessarily cutting squares into triangles and trying to assemble them that way, because you're sewing on a bias, on a stretchy edge. So things start to go a little crazy at times. So there's 2. But for this one, it just made more sense to try to save some fabric. So for the third half square triangle you need, just cut that. I'm going to cut that in half and have 2 of them. I'm going to cut one of these in half. Set this aside. We'll cut this one too, because we're going to need it later on. But for right now, you just need one of each. You're just going to put them right sides together, and we're going to sew 1/4 inch seams. So try to make sure your points are matching at the beginning and the end, and then just take it to your machine and sew it. Then we're going to press it and trim it and all those things. Now keep in mind, a lot of patterns you'll see they will tell you like cut a 3 7/8 square and then do it this way. Round up. Just generally it's nicer if you round up. You can trim back down. You don't have to worry about if your seam's a little off. It gives you that room to trim. Nobody really likes cutting 7/8. So I know at the beginning with the big one, that's partly why I told you you could round up to 13, because trying to measure 7/8 on a ruler, it can be obnoxious. So I don't mind rounding up so I can trim back down and know that I'm going to be more accurate that way. just going to press this guy and trim him to the 4.5. And same as the others, it just has a little bit of extra that you just don't want in your quilt. The rest of this is pretty much going to be creating rows of these half square triangles and putting them all together. So we'll show you how that goes. So the top row, please make sure you refer to the picture, make sure you're laying everything out correctly, because you want to make sure these prints, definitely are the top, towards the corner, all those kinds of things. So the first two in the row are just 2 half square triangles. So we're going to do that first. If in doubt, always lay it out. It's just going to save you in the end. Press it. I like pressing as I go most of the time. I just like working with those flatter pieces. Okay, so we have those. Then in the picture, we need to add this triangle. Of course, scratchy throat. The pollen has been crazy around here, which has made my sinuses just not happy. Same thing, 1/4 inch seam. Oh, and we'll point out. So I have the top 2 corners lined up. There's this little, what we call a dog ear, and that's what you want. You want that angle to fall off the edge. That's okay. That's part of it. So that. And then row 2 is just 1 half square triangle and 1 triangle. Trim your threads as you go, please. Just makes a cleaner quilt that way. Press this guy. I'm going to press that and let that sit there, and the heat's going to nicely just set that seam in. So row 2. Row 2 is half square triangle and a triangle. Same thing. Lay them out. Make sure you have these triangles all going the same way. And then line up your top corner and let that little dog ear fall over at the end. Okay? So we'll do this. And we'll press it. Trim. And then the last row is really just a triangle. Okay, so this is row number 2, and then at the bottom we have this guy. So I'm actually going to put this guy on. So we're going to put them right sides together, match my corners. If that guy bothers you, just take your snips and trim him off, because you don't need him anymore. And it's less bulk in your quilt. Line up the rest of this and sew that 1/4 inch. So that way 2 and 3 essentially are going to be all together, and then we're going to sew it to the first row that we made, and this triangle will be ready. So here we go. So there's that bottom corner. Nice thing about how this makes a great design wall right here. Okay, so we have row 1 and row 2, 3 combo. We're just going to put them together, right sides, match your seams. So these first 2 squares, this seam's going to match up, and just pin it. and then you're going to sew it. So the same thing's going to happen. You're going to have, if this bothers you, go ahead, trim that off so it's straight, and you're still going to have a little dog ear that's going to come off the end there, and that's okay. You want that. That means your triangles are working the way they should. Make sure your beginning and ends all match up. That's very important. Otherwise you'll have kind of a bow in or a curve out if they don't match. And you want to try to keep the edges of your blocks as straight as possible, because as I was saying earlier, the more that it's off, it's just going to keep creating that wave or offset in your quilt. A little more starch. And then press this open. Nice and flat. Okay. Look how pretty that is. So now we're going to join it to our triangle, right? So let's clean off my table, not throw things on the floor. I love having all my workspace here, but sometimes it's not quite as big as I'd like. So I'm gonna come back over here and kind of show you what I got going on. Besides a hot mess. All right. So how I do this is I try to make sure my points are lining up, and then I'm just going to make sure these corners all line up. Everything's lining up as best as possible. And then I'm going to actually put a couple pins in, because this is so big that potentially by the time I take it to my machine, it will shift or do crazy things. So I'm going to pin the edge. I'm actually going to cut, there's a couple little dog ears sticking out. We don't need those anymore, so cut that off. So nice straight edges, and then do our 1/4 inch seam, and then we'll press it. When it comes to trimming this, I do have a 12.5 inch square, which makes it helpful. So I do recommend potentially investing in a 12.5 inch square just to measure things. But otherwise, go back to the mat, line them up like you did for cutting out that square. Because I lied. I forgot. It is 12. Okay. Just making sure we're good. We'll press this seam open. Use lots of steam. And then trim off any excess. So that's what she looks like. We'll just need to clean her up. I'll take you back over to the cutting table and show you how that works. All right, so now we're going to trim up block number 3. It is this lovely bird in the air block now, finally. And I do have some excess because I cut this triangle larger just to give me that room to trim. So just like with trimming half square triangles, I'm going to make sure this diagonal line on my ruler is following the diagonal of the block. I'm trying to keep this side centered so that my points don't get lost. I'm trying to make sure there's a 1/4 inch where each join is in these half square triangles, and that I don't lose any of the fabric over here. I'm just going to cut off some of the wonkiness. All right, so if I didn't have a 12.5 inch square ruler, it would operate a little differently, because you're going to have to try to line it up on your mat. Hopefully if you have a diagonal line on your mat, you can use that corner, line up the diagonal of the block in that corner, and have to trim 2 sides, rotate it, and trim 2 more sides. So highly recommend investing in a 12.5 inch square. I do use this quite often. I generally don't do any blocks bigger than this, so it's kind of my go-to for my bigger blocks. I can rotate it around. These 2 sides should be straight. It should still be on my diagonal, which it is. And then I'm going to just trim. There's not much excess on this side, thankfully. So I'm just going to trim off that little bit in those little dog ears. And then you have your 12.5 inch square. All right, so love this birds in an air. It's a classic block, but it just is stunning. So hopefully those tips helped you guys, and we'll see you next week for block 4.